The bikers from both groups, once fueled by rivalry, began riding together, their patched jackets now symbols of unity rather than division. They organized charity rides for veterans, honoring not just the Marine who brought them together, but all those who had served. That day had changed them, not because of a fight, but because of a salute. As for the Marine, he recovered and returned to his quiet life, never seeking fame or recognition. But his story lived on, not because he stood for hours, but because he stood for something. And in doing so, he reminded the world that honor isn't just in the battles we fight, but in the promises we keep and the respect we show, even when no one's watching. A single shot rang out, and when the smoke cleared, everything had changed. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed through the smoky haze, cutting through the chaos like a blade. For a heartbeat, everything stood still. No shouting, no movement, just the faint whisper of dust settling in the quiet that followed. Then, slowly, the scene came back into focus. The former commanding officer dropped to his knees, his weapons slipping from his grasp, a clean shot lodged squarely in his shoulder. The farmer stood unharmed, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, holding the rifle steady. It had been his shot, a quiet, precise decision made without hesitation. The son exhaled slowly, a subtle nod exchanged between father and son, an unspoken acknowledgement of survival and trust. The tactical team faltered, their leader glancing between the fallen officer and the son. Without their commanding voice, their purpose unraveled. They weren't prepared for resistance, not like this. Some of them dropped their weapons, others simply backed away, realizing they were part of something bigger than they'd signed up for. The bikers, scattered and disoriented, took the chance to flee into the night, leaving their broken pride behind with the dust and smoke. They'd come looking for trouble and found a war they never understood. The son approached his father, his breath steadying as he holstered his weapon. "You okay?" he asked quietly. The farmer gave a slight nod, wiping the sweat from his brow with the same calm he'd carried through the entire ordeal. "Could have handled a few more," he muttered with a faint grin. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink, the tension finally began to fade. The farmhouse, battered but standing, seemed almost defiant against the scars of the night's battle. The son knew this wasn't the end of the story. His past had found him, and it might find him again. But for now, they had won. Not because of weapons or tactics, but because of something stronger: family, resilience, and the quiet power of standing your ground. And as he stood beside his father, the sun rising behind them, he realized some battles aren't fought on distant fields. They are fought at home, where it matters most. 987. The leader barely registered the movement before he was flat on his back, gasping for breath. The son hadn't thrown a punch in the usual sense. It was more like a precise, fluid motion, effortless yet devastating. The other bikers froze for a split second, trying to process what had just happened. Then chaos erupted. But this wasn't a bar fight, not the kind they were used to. The son moved like he'd been forged for moments like this. Every step, every strike was calculated, controlled. He didn't waste energy. He didn't hesitate. He wasn't fueled by rage, but by something far more dangerous: discipline. One biker reached for a metal pike near the door, swinging wildly. The son ducked effortlessly, grabbing the man's wrist with a grip that made him drop the weapon instantly. A twist, a sharp movement, and the biker crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. The others weren't faring any better. Meanwhile, outside, a lookout from the gang heard the commotion and radioed someone. Reinforcements. They weren't just a random group of bikers. They were connected to something bigger, something darker. They had ties to a network that thrived on control, intimidation, and fear. They didn't know who the farmer's son was, but soon they'd find out. And they'd realize it wasn't just a fight. It was a mistake, one that would spiral far beyond this quiet farmhouse. The farmhouse had turned into a battleground, but the real fight was just beginning. As the last of the bikers inside hit the floor, groaning and defeated, the son stood in the dim light, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. His face remained unreadable, the same calm etched into every line, but his eyes flicked toward the window. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the distant roar of engines growing louder. Reinforcements were coming. Outside, headlights pierced the darkness, cutting across the empty fields like sharp blades. More bikers, a larger group this time, rolled in with a vengeance. They weren't here to scare anyone. They were here for payback. Their leader had already called in men from nearby towns, pulling in favors from people who owed him. This wasn't just a random gang anymore. It was an organized crew with a reputation to protect. They thought they were hunting prey. Inside the house, the farmer remained quiet, grabbing an old radio from the shelf and sliding it across the table toward his son. "It's not over," he said simply. The son picked it up, tuning into a secure frequency he hadn't touched in years. His voice was low but clear. "This is Echo 7. I'm calling in a code red." Silence followed on the other end for a beat, then static crackled, and a voice replied. "Echo 7. Thought you were out." "Not anymore," the son answered, his gaze fixed on the lights growing brighter outside. The bikers surrounded the farmhouse, their engines rumbling like a storm trapped in metal. They dismounted, weapons in hand, chains, bats, whatever they could grab. Their leader, bruised from the earlier fight but fueled by rage, barked orders. "Bring them out." But the son didn't plan on waiting. Moving with precision, he secured the doors and checked the old farmhouse layout. Every window, every blind spot. He wasn't defending a house, he was preparing a battlefield. The farmer loaded his old hunting rifle, his hands steady as ever. "Didn't think we'd be doing this again," he muttered. His son gave a faint smile. "Me neither." Outside, footsteps crunched closer, voices shouting threats. Inside, silence, sharp, tense, waiting to snap. Then, just as the bikers reached the porch, a distant sound echoed through the fields. A low, rhythmic thumping growing louder. Not engines, something else. Reinforcements were on the way, but whose? The tension thickened, hanging in the air like the final breath before a storm unleashes its fury. The thumping grew louder, steady and rhythmic, cutting through the tense silence like a heartbeat on the edge of panic. The bikers paused, their confident smirks fading as they turned their heads toward the dark horizon. It wasn't the sound of more bikes. It was heavier, sharper, mechanical in a way that didn't fit the rural setting. The son's eyes narrowed. He recognized that sound. It wasn't reinforcements. At least, not his. From the shadows beyond the fields, black SUVs emerged, headlights off, moving with purpose. Their sleek, armored frames glinted under the faint moonlight. This wasn't a local crew. This was something else, something organized. The bikers, realizing these weren't allies, backed up instinctively, confusion etched across their faces. The farmer's son gripped the radio tighter, his jaw clenching. They found me. The open road stretched for miles, cutting through the heart of the countryside like a scar on the land. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the fields, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant rumble of engines. That rumble grew louder, rolling in like an approaching storm. A group of bikers, clad in leather and covered in dust from the journey, thundered down the road, their laughter sharp against the quiet evening. They weren't just passing through, they were looking for trouble. They'd pulled up to a small farmhouse, its weathered wood and flickering porch light making it seem like an easy target. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe they just liked throwing their weight around, but they figured they could have some fun intimidating the old farmer who owned the place. They had done it before in other towns, harassing locals, taking what they wanted, leaving destruction behind. But what they didn't know was that this time they had picked the wrong house. Inside, the farmer sat at the kitchen table, his hands rough and scarred from years of hard work. He was alone, except for his son, who had just arrived home. The bikers didn't know about him, and if they had, they might have thought twice about what they were about to do, because this wasn't just any man. His son was something else entirely. A soldier. A warrior, a force master. He had been trained in ways they couldn't even begin to understand, had fought battles far beyond anything they could imagine. The moment the first biker kicked over a bucket outside, the father simply exhaled, calm and steady. "You should leave," he murmured under his breath. But they wouldn't. They never did, until it was too late. The screen fades to black. The sound of heavy boots echoed on the wooden porch, followed by rough knocks on the door. The farmer didn't flinch. He'd seen storms before, real ones, and the kind that came wearing leather jackets. His son stood quietly in the shadows of the small kitchen, his sharp eyes tracking every movement outside. There was a certain stillness about him, the kind that came from years of discipline, battles fought far from home, and a deep understanding of what real danger looked like. This wasn't it. Not yet. The door swung open with a loud creak, and the bikers barged in, their leader swaggering like he owned the place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a smirk plastered across his face, the kind of man used to getting his way through intimidation. "Nice little place you got here, old man," he sneered, knocking over a chair just to make a point. The farmer stayed seated, his hands steady, while his son remained in the shadows, unnoticed. "What do you want?" the farmer asked quietly, his voice calm, almost too calm for the situation. The leader grinned, glancing back at his crew. "Oh, nothing much. Just passing through. Thought we'd say hello. Maybe take a little something for the road." The others chuckled, spreading out, knocking over a few more things, trying to stir fear. But the fear never came. The son's eyes never left them. His mind wasn't filled with panic but calculation, every exit, every angle, every weakness. He'd been trained for this, though his training wasn't from any regular military. He'd served in places that didn't make the news, fighting battles that most people would never know existed. They called him a force master for a reason, not just because of his skills, but because of what he could do when pushed. The bikers had no idea. They thought they were in control, but the air was shifting, thick with an invisible tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm cracks open the sky. The farmer gave his son a single glance. A silent message passed between them. It wasn't fear, it was permission. And that's when everything began to change. The leader of the bikers leaned in closer to the farmer, his grin fading slightly when he noticed the old man's calm, unshaken eyes. There was something unsettling about that quiet confidence, but pride kept the biker from backing down. "You're not scared, huh?" he muttered, gripping the farmer's worn shirt collar and yanking him to his feet. The wooden chair scraped loudly against the floor, breaking the fragile silence. Before the farmer could respond, a shadow moved. Fast, too fast for anyone to react. The sun stepped out from the darkness, his presence shifting the entire room's energy. His expression was controlled, eyes sharp, yet there was something deeper hidden beneath, like a wildfire held back by thin glass. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to.